When the wolf howled right at the hospital gate, my breath caught because I understood. This was not an accident. He was calling me. I had just left a long shift, shoulders aching, pockets full of tape. The lamps hissed over the empty lot. I wanted a shower and sleep. Nothing else. He stepped from the hedge where the light met darkness. No snarl, no teeth. His ribs rose and fell under a gray coat. His eyes found mine and held. I took one step back. I thought he would leave the moment I did. He did not. He lowered his head, not as a threat, but like someone asking. A sound rose from his chest that was not a growl. It was a low, broken call. Fear and something tender hit me at once. A car door slammed. He flinched, then checked me with a quick look, as if to be sure I was still there. He took 2 steps backward, paused silent on wet asphalt, never breaking our line. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. He gave a short whine and slipped toward shadow. Then he paused and glanced over his shoulder, exactly like someone who wants you to follow, but is afraid to ask twice. Training said, "Stay clear." The staff door carried warnings about wildlife, but the way he watched me was not hunger. It was recognition, and it shook me where I could not name. I stepped forward, then again. He eased back the same distance, matching me like we were tied by a thin thread. When I stopped, he stopped. When I moved, he moved. He looked at me like I was his last hope. I told myself to turn around, to call security. I even shifted my bag to leave. He made that soft sound again, the kind that catches behind the breastbone. My legs would not listen. He circled once at the curb, careful not to come too close, nose to the wind, then back to me. His tail was low. He was trying to look small. For a hunter, that made no sense. Each step he placed with care, each pause a question. He backed toward the service road that slips behind the maintenance shed, and into the strip of woods past the fence. He stopped at the edge of the light and waited. The picture was crooked, yet my body leaned his way as if the ground tilted. I checked myself like a patient. Breath, hands, eyes. None of it felt steady. I thought it was over, that I would step away and he would vanish. But the truth pulled the other direction. I took one careful step toward the road. He slipped backward the same length, then sat, ears forward, eyes on my face. He waited for my choice like he understood what a choice is. My skin prickled. "If you want me to come, show me," I said. The wolf stood, turned toward the dark, and then, plain and slow, looked back to be sure I had seen. It was so human, it hurt. I told myself I would follow only to the shed, and then stop. That would be safe. That would be sensible. I thought that would be the end. But nature had another plan waiting in the trees I could not yet see. So I stepped off the concrete and onto the thin gravel of the service road. The wolf moved with me, not ahead, not behind, but beside, at a distance that felt agreed upon. In that first stretch of dark, I knew only this. He had chosen me. I should have been only afraid. I was afraid, and I also felt a quiet I had never known. I did not know yet what waited beyond the fence. I did not know why a wild thing would ask help from someone like me. I only knew his eyes had held me, and I was moving where they led. If I had known what waited there, I might have run. I did not. He did not leave me. He kept stepping backward, light on his paws, eyes locked on mine, as if a thin thread ran between us and he was reeling it in. I told myself to stop. I told myself to turn around and walk to the lit lobby and pretend none of this was happening. I decided he was only luring me into the woods, and that would be the end of it. But he didn't turn and vanish. He waited. He showed the way without ever rushing me. When I slowed, he slowed. When I breathed too fast, he looked back and held still until my breath settled. He moved like someone leading a frightened child across a street. It made no sense, and yet I felt the sense of it in my chest, like a steady drum. My hands were shaking, but my legs kept going after him. We reached the fence where the service road drops behind the maintenance shed. He slipped through a gap near the ground, then faced me, silent, as if to say, "Here." I crouched, slid my bag ahead, and felt cold wire kiss my shoulder. It stung. He tensed, but did not flee. He waited until I was through, then took 3 careful steps backward, leaving me the space to stand. I told myself that was enough adventure for one night. I would go back, wash the dust off my scrubs, forget this. But the way he watched me pulled me forward like a tide. He kept glancing at my chest, where my badge hung, where alcohol and soap had stained the fabric. It was crazy, but the look felt like recognition, like he knew what I did with my hands, with my breath, with my calm voice, over fear. Something inside me answered before my mind agreed. I was not just a woman in the dark. I was a nurse, and he needed a nurse. The ground softened to pine needles. He veered off the gravel and chose a path that cut through brush but spared my ankles. He tested each turn, then looked back to offer it to me. It was not a hunt. It was a guide. I kept waiting for the moment he would lunge or vanish or call others from the dark. Instead, he paced himself to me, as if he had learned my length of step. A wind slid through the trees and brought with it a thin, metallic scent, the kind that lives in emergency rooms and long nights. My skin went cold. I stopped. He stopped. He lifted his head and inhaled, then made a soft sound that was not fear and not anger. It was a plea. I told myself it was a trick of damp leaves and nerves. I told myself I was imagining it, but the smell was there, faint and real. I checked the sky through the branches and thought about calling for help. I could hear the nurse in me counting supplies I didn't have: gauze, tape, water, light. The list rose like a wave. The wolf tilted his head, caught my eye, and gave the smallest nod of his muzzle toward the dark. It was absurd to read meaning in that, and yet the meaning was plain. Keep coming. He led me past a fallen log slick with moss, then waited while I climbed. He looked up and down the path before crossing a narrow ditch, the way people do at intersections. He was careful with me. The care unsettled me more than any snarl could have. Fear ran down my back in a bright line, and at the same time something tender opened in my chest like a door. I told myself again that I was being pulled into danger, that he was clever, and I was foolish. I pictured teeth. I pictured headlines. I pictured how small I would look from above if I disappeared into these trees. I decided once more that he was only luring me deeper. But then he did the strangest thing. He stepped aside and made room for me to pass him, as if he wanted me to take the lead for a moment, to see the next bend with my own eyes. My hands were trembling so much I tucked them under my elbows to hide the shake. My legs, though, they did not ask permission. They went after him. The path narrowed. The dark gathered close. He kept showing me the way with those small, patient pauses, with those looks over his shoulder that felt like questions I already knew how to answer. I still didn't know what waited beyond the next stand of trees. I didn't know whether the scent in the air belonged to animal or human or something worse. I only knew this wild thing had chosen me for a reason I could not explain. And even while fear spoke loud, another voice, quieter, steadier, said, "Keep going." I thought that if I reached the old service bridge and found nothing, I would stop there. I would turn back and call it a night and a strange story I would never tell. But we were not heading toward the bridge at all. He had another turn in mind, one I had never taken, one that curved into a part of the woods I had no name for. And he was still waiting for me, one step ahead, the line between us pulled tight and shining in the dark. He led me deeper, and the trees closed over us like a slow breath. The path thinned to a thread. He kept looking back, quick glances that counted my steps, as if he were checking a pulse. Each time our eyes met, he waited a heartbeat and moved again. I told myself this would end at a den, at teeth, at the oldest story in the woods. I decided his pack would be there, and that would be my end. But he did not speed up. He did not drive me. He matched me like a partner who knows your gait. We broke a line of brush, and the ground fell away into a shallow dip. He paused at the lip and tested the slope, with one paw, then another, the way I test a floor for a patient who might fall. He gave a small sound and looked left, then right, showing me where to place my feet. The care in it shook me more than fear. It is strange when a wild thing worries for you. A chill ran through the leaves, and with it a faint smell I knew too well, thin and metallic and far away. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring, and the sound that left him was not a bark and not a growl. It was a low, careful call, as if he were trying to speak quietly to whoever waited ahead. He did it again, longer this time, a soft ribbon of sound that climbed the dark like smoke. There was no anger in his howl, only despair. Something moved high in the branches, birds shifting sleep to wing. He howled once more, and the tone changed, like a question. He was calling to someone not here yet, or someone too weak to answer. The thought landed hard and simple. He was not hunting. He was leading me to something. We came to a fallen pine, slick with damp, and he chose a gap low to the ground where my knees would not tear. He slid through and turned, ears lifted, eyes on me, patient as stone. I crawled, grit biting my palms, and he backed up exactly the space I needed, as if measuring me in steps. I kept waiting for him to vanish, to leave me alone in the hush. He stayed. The air grew colder in that way it does near water. I heard a trickle, thin and secret, and then a small clatter from ahead, like metal touched by a careless hand. My chest tightened. The nurse in me began to make a list again, and the woman in me wanted to run. He answered by giving the softest whine and turning his head to the right, guiding me around a thorn patch I would not have seen. He was thinking with me. That was the part that scared me most. He stopped without warning and sat, not alert like a guard, but waiting like a messenger at a door he cannot open. He tilted his muzzle and let out another of those low calls, then listened. I found myself listening too. The forest held its breath. A moment later, so faint I could have believed I imagined it, something answered from the dark with a dull, irregular sound. Not a voice, not an animal call either. A thud, a scrape, a breath that could not find a rhythm. I swallowed. My mouth had gone dry. He stood, took 3 steps, and looked back, and in that look I felt the same push I give a patient who is afraid of the first step out of bed. You can. I told myself again that a pack would break from the trees, that this was how foolish people die. I said it out loud to hear how it sounded. The words fell flat on the needles. We skirted a tangle of roots and came to a narrow strip of mud that held prints like soft stamps. His were there, clean and deep. Beside them, other marks cut a jagged line, heavy and human, as if someone had half fallen, half dragged themselves along. The sight made heat rise to my face. My fear shifted, changed shape, found a new name. The wolf lifted his head to the night and sang that thin call again. And this time, close by, the answer came as a gasp and a scrape, and then nothing. I could feel the end of the thread in my hands now. My legs wanted to run toward it. My mind wanted to hold me back. The two pulled in opposite directions and tore me open. He stepped aside and gave me the path. It felt like being offered a confession. I moved past him, and he fell in a pace behind, not pushing, only there, a steady weight at my back that said I was not alone. I did not know what I would find in the next pocket of dark. I did not know who had made those broken marks or why a wild thing had come for me and not for anyone else. I only knew that the sound ahead came from someone losing time and that I had no right to waste any more of it. I thought, for one last second, about turning around. Then the night opened, and I saw where he had been leading me all along. The trees opened just enough to show a hollow under a leaning pine. And there he was, a man on his side, one leg twisted under him, face gray with cold and shock. The air held the thin iron smell I know from long nights. My breath stalled. For a heartbeat, my mind made the oldest guess. I thought he was just guarding his kill. Then the wolf did something I cannot forget. He sat down beside the man like a sentinel, lifted his muzzle, and let out a low, broken howl that slid between the trunks and came back soft, as if asking the night for help. There was no triumph in it, no claim. In that sound, there was only despair. He turned to me, and for the first time I saw a wild animal look at me with a plea. I dropped to my knees. Leaves were wet through my scrubs. The man's chest moved in shallow seesaws. I touched his shoulder and felt the dull heat of fever or pain. The wolf flinched at my reach, muscles tight, and I froze. He looked at my hands, then at the man, then back at me, and lowered his head until his muzzle nearly touched the ground. He made a soft, steadying whine. It felt like permission. I rolled the man onto his back, careful with the neck, cleared pine needles from his mouth, opened the airway. His pulse at the throat was a faint drum, there but far away. I pressed my palm to the worst of the bleeding and counted without numbers, the way you do when you are afraid of losing the beat. The wolf edged closer and then stopped, drawing a line in the dirt with one paw, as if reminding himself to keep distance. I tore my scarf and packed it tight, then wrapped it and tied off with a knot I have made more times than I can admit. The man groaned from somewhere deep. The sound put heat in my face and steadiness in my hands. The wolf angled himself to the other side, not touching, just there, his eyes flicking from my fingers to the man's mouth, watching the rise and fall as if he too had learned to count breaths. For a moment, the old fear returned hard and simple. Any second now he would change his mind, remember his hunger, remember what I was. My heart pounded so loud I heard it in my ears. But he did not move. He only looked at me, waiting, asking. The asking undid me more than any snarl could have. "Stay," I whispered, absurd to speak a command to something that owed me nothing. He flicked an ear and stayed. I lifted the man's eyelids, pupils slow, skin cold and damp. I spoke to him the way I speak in trauma bays, low and steady, as if voice alone can hold a person in the room. The forest took in my words and gave nothing back but breath. He needed heat, pressure, time we did not have. I shrugged out of my jacket and laid it over his chest, then slid another strip of cloth beneath his calf to lift it from the sucking mud. The wolf shifted with me, keeping a careful triangle between us. When the man shivered, the wolf hummed that same low sound and leaned nearer, not touching, close enough to share his warm, wild breath. I glanced through the trees toward where the road should be and felt the distance like a wall. No signal, no siren, no help that could find us fast enough without a guide. The thought landed with a weight I could not ignore. The guide was already here. I pressed down again, checked the chest, counted the thin rises. The wolf tipped his head, listening to something ahead I could not hear, then looked at me as if to say we were running out of minutes. Every part of me wanted a straight corridor and bright light and hands to pass supplies. But we were in a green room with a ceiling of needles and one patient who had been found by a miracle. The man's breath hitched and stuttered. I squeezed his hand and told him my name. I told him to stay. My voice shook. The wolf answered with a small, urgent whine that tightened the air. Despair lived in it, yes, but also a strange kind of faith, as if he believed I could do what needed doing. I thought, for a heartbeat, that this would be where it ended. Pressure, warmth, a prayer, and then the forest taking him back. I thought the story would close here in a circle I could understand, but the wolf stood, looked down the dark path we had not taken yet, and then back at me with a new insistence. He was not done asking. He was not done leading. Somewhere beyond the next line of trees, The night held another piece I had not seen, and he was telling me we still had to go. I went to the simple things first, because simple things keep people alive. I cleared his mouth again, tilted his chin, listened at his lips for air. The breaths were thin and ragged, but they were there. I pressed my ear to his chest and felt the falter of a rhythm, trying to hold on. My hands found the soaked bandage I had tied and pressed until my forearms burned. Warmth bled into my fingers and then slowed under my weight. I counted without numbers because numbers would make me panic. The wolf lay down, not at the man's throat or mine, but along his feet, body angled toward the trees as if he meant to guard both of us at once. His ears kept taking turns, one forward to the forest, one turned toward me. He breathed hard beside me, as if sharing every second of the fight for life. I decided he would leave once he saw I could manage, that he would vanish back into the dark the way a dream does at dawn. He did not leave. I used my phone for light and my jacket as cover. I packed a fresh strip of scarf into the wound and tied another knot, firmer, flatter, talking to the man the whole time, because the voice is a thread people can hold. His eyelids fluttered. The wolf lifted his head at that tiny change and gave a low, humming note that settled like a hand on my shoulder. There was no menace in it, only a steadying. I took his wrist, felt for a pulse I could trust, found it faint but present, and exhaled without knowing I had been holding my breath. The wolf shifted closer to the man's boots, not touching, close enough that their warmth met in the cold air. He kept his eyes on my hands, and I felt the oddest thing, like having a second pair of eyes in the room that believed in what I was doing. I reached for the bandage tail to cinch it, and my knuckles brushed the wolf's cheek. He went still, every muscle in me locked, waiting for a snap. He did not snap. He did not even flinch. He turned his head the smallest degree and pressed his temple, soft and deliberate, into the back of my hand. I have never touched a wolf. My palm slid, slow as prayer, over his brow to his ear. The fur was thick and coarse at first, then silk near the base. He let out a breath like a sigh and closed his eyes for a heartbeat. The world tilted. "Good," I whispered. To him or to myself, I do not know. "Good." He opened his eyes and returned to watching the man's chest. I tightened the wrap, checked for bleeding, added pressure where the scarf went dark. The wolf stayed very still, as if he understood that stillness was a part of medicine. Another shiver rippled through the man. I spoke my name again, told him where he was, told him to stay with me. The wolf answered with that soft hum, and I felt my own voice steady. I slid my belt above the worst of the wound as a last resort and eased it until the bleeding slowed to a stubborn oozing. The forest listened. Time turned strange and long. For a few minutes, everything narrowed to breath and pressure and the sound of the wolf's chest rising and falling. He kept glancing from my face to the line of trees, alert to a world I could not see, and then back to the man, as if he had sworn something he meant to keep. I could not shake the feeling that we were 3 points of one circle, tied by a promise none of us had spoken aloud. I thought the wolf would settle his debt and go. I thought he would leave me to finish the work and melt into the night the way wild things do when they are done with you. But when the man groaned and my hand slipped with the sudden movement, the wolf leaned closer, almost as if to brace my elbow with his presence. It was nothing, and it was everything. It kept me from losing the seal I had made. My hands stopped shaking. My legs did not. I kept one palm on the pressure and used the other to feel the man's breath at his mouth, the faint tickle on my skin, proof that the line still held. The wolf's nose twitched. He turned his head toward the path we had not taken yet, and then back to me with that insistent look I was learning to obey. He rose, took 2 steps toward the dark, and looked back, ears high, eyes lit with a question. "Not yet," I told him without words. Not yet. He seemed to understand. He sank down again, close enough that I could feel the heat of his flank through the thin fabric of my scrubs. The three of us breathed. The night pressed in. Somewhere beyond the trees, something shifted with a dull scrape, a reminder that our time here was borrowed. I did not know what waited in that direction or why he wanted me to see it, only that the road forward was not finished. And he, this wild, impossible guardian, was not finished leading me. He came back all at once, a gulp of air like breaking the surface, a rough cough that shook his ribs. I pressed my palm to his chest and told him to stay with me. His eyes found mine, blurry and wild, and then slid to the wolf. Fear hit his face, and then something like shame. "Snare," he rasped. "My leg." I pulled the jacket aside and saw the truth written in skin. A deep, brutal bite where wire had cinched and chewed. The pattern was too clean to be teeth. It was metal. "Who did this?" I asked, though I already knew. He swallowed and stared at the wolf. "Me," he said, "for wolves." For a heartbeat, the world went silent. The oldest story rewrote itself in my hands. The hunter had trapped himself. The wolf had not left him to the dark. The wolf had brought him a nurse. I felt my mouth form a useless no. I thought this was where it would end. I had helped, he would live, and the night would close over the rest. The wolf shifted, lifting his head from the man's boots. He watched our faces like someone listening at a door. I pressed fresh cloth into the wound and felt the slow answer of blood easing under my weight. The man curled a hand away from me, instinct or fear, and the wolf leaned forward with a small, steady hum. It was not a warning. It was a hold still. "Why would he do this?" I whispered, not sure who I was asking. "I set steel all week," the man said, breath scraping. "For him, for all of them. I came to check the lines, stepped wrong. It took me. Thought he'd finish it." His eyes flinched to the wolf. He didn't. The wolf rose on his elbows and crept a hand's breadth closer, keeping his body low, his tail quiet. He paused when the man tensed, then lowered his head until his nose hovered above the man's fingers. He breathed there, warm and careful. The man sobbed once, a broken, astonished sound, and let his fingers uncurl. The wolf touched them with the lightest press of his tongue, like a seal, then looked at me. I have seen people forgive across bedsides and years. I have heard the words and seen the hands. This was different. In his eyes there was forgiveness, stronger than any human. The man turned his face toward me, a plea wrapped in pride. "I'm not good," he said. "I wanted him dead." He blinked hard. He stayed. I checked the pulse again. Still there, thin as thread. I tightened the belt above the worst of it, checked the color of his foot, loosened a hair, found the line between help and harm. The wolf kept his place at the man's feet, eyes flicking between my hands and the dark, breathing fast, as if he were doing the work with me. He was heavy with heat and smell and the wild, and yet he felt like a teammate in a room with no walls. The metal scent rose stronger for a moment, and I followed it with my eyes to a shine half buried in the leaves a little way off, a loop of cable, the snare's tail, dragged loose but still biting the man's boot at the heel. He had fought free and crawled here. The wolf must have kept him alive by not being what we believe he is. The thought shook me so hard my hand steadied. "We need help," I said. "We need a stretcher, lights, more hands." The words were a wish thrown at tall trees. There was no service bar, no siren, only our breaths and the restless night. The wolf stood, made that soft, urgent sound, and flicked his ears toward the path we had not taken. He wanted me to see something else. He had more to show. The line between us tugged again. The man saw it too. "He kept leaving and coming back," he whispered, like he had two jobs, me and something. his face folded with pain. "I think there's more steel out there. I set too many." The truth landed like a stone. He had laid a field of traps, and the wolf was not finished. He had chosen not to let a man die. Now he was asking me to choose who to save first and how to save both. Gratitude and anger rose together in my chest until they were the same thing. I squeezed the man's shoulder and told him I would not leave him. I told him we would make it out. The wolf watched my mouth like he could read the shape of promises. He stepped away from the boots, turned toward the dark, then looked back with that same question that felt like a hand on my back. "Come." I wanted a simple ending. I wanted to say I had done my part, and the rest would be handled by headlights and uniforms. I wanted to believe this story had already reached safety, but the forest did not agree. The wolf did not agree. He had brought me to the first truth and was ready to lead me to the next. And I, shaking and steady all at once, knew I was going to follow. He began to cry the way hurt men do when the body lets go before the mind does. Not loud, not proud, just a broken leak of sound that made the leaves tremble. He turned his face from the wolf, then back again, and the truth spilled out of him like blood. "I set them," he whispered. "All of them. For wolves. For him." His mouth shook. "It took me. I deserved it." The word deserved hung in the cold like a nail. The wolf did not move away. He stayed at the man's boots, chest heaving, eyes clear and steady, as if he had decided to be the last thing this man saw if the worst happened. He was breathing hard beside me, as if he shared every second of the fight for life. I checked the bandage, checked the pulse, spoke to keep the man anchored. His gaze searched my face for a verdict I could not give. Then his eyes slid again to the wolf and would not leave. Shame washed him, then something softer. He covered his face with his dirty hands and sobbed. "I wanted you dead," he said to the animal. "You stayed." The wolf's ears flicked at the voice. He stood very slowly, came one careful step closer, and lowered his head until his nose was level with the man's fingers. He waited there, like a question. When the man did not pull away, the wolf touched his knuckles with the lightest brush of his tongue, once, and settled back down. In that small, impossible gesture, I felt a weight shift inside me. In that moment, I understood animals are wiser than us. I told the man the truth I had. He was alive and would stay that way if we kept him warm and still. I told him help was coming even before I had proof. Then I stood, moved a few paces uphill where the trees thinned, held my phone to the sky, and caught a single bar like a miracle caught in a net. I sent a dry, clipped message to dispatch with trembling thumbs and a dropped pin. The wolf watched me do it, then turned toward the black line of the service track and lifted his muzzle. He did not howl like before. This was not a plea. This was a signal. A long, measured call that climbed and held, then fell, then rose again. He waited, listened, and called once more. I could feel it draw a line through the dark to the open world beyond the trees. When the man moaned and shifted, the wolf stopped and returned to him, lay down against the boots, and kept his eyes on the breath. Time folded. I kept pressure. I kept voice. The man kept breathing as if each breath was a bargain. Twice he tried to speak and failed. The third time, he managed it. "Why?" he asked me, but his eyes were on the wolf. Why would you? Because he could, I said, not sure until I heard it. Because someone had to. The distant slap of tires on gravel found us at last, then the flash of weak light trembling between trunks. The wolf rose, ears forward, body low, torn between guarding and warning. He looked at me, and I nodded like I could give orders to a wild thing. He slid to the edge of the path and waited. Voices came, unsure and too loud for the trees. I waved with my free hand, called back, kept my other hand where it mattered. The wolf stood where my light fell, and then stepped out of it, then back, guiding them with absence and return. When they saw him, hands froze. They looked to me, and I said, "It's all right." He stayed because we stayed. The words felt crazy and also true. They knelt beside us, took in what I had done, added more hands, more heat, more light. The wolf did not run. He hovered just beyond the circle, eyes on the man's face. When the stretcher slid under the body and the straps came across the chest, the man turned his head, searching, and found the eyes he needed. He reached a shaking hand as far as the strap allowed, palm open. The wolf stepped close enough that his breath touched that palm. The man whispered a hoarse, broken sorry. The wolf blinked, slow as sleep, and held his gaze. Forgiveness moved between them without language. They lifted. The wolf followed 2 paces behind, silent, until we reached the gap in the fence and the raw glare of headlights. He stopped at the edge of that hard light, unwilling to cross, unwilling to leave. He waited while they loaded the stretcher. He waited while the doors swung. He waited while the engine caught. He did not look at me until the very last second, and in his eyes I saw a truth I could not carry without changing. I thought that was the end. I thought I had helped and he had lived, and the forest would close, and I would never see the wolf again. If your heart is shaking right now, you understand what I felt. If you believe nature still works miracles, subscribe. I tell the truth about what the wild can do, but the story did not fold there. As the ambulance pulled away and the red washed through the trees, the wolf turned from the road and faced the deeper dark, the path we had not taken. He lifted his head and gave one soft call that held no fear, only purpose, and looked back at me. He was not finished, and I, who had wanted only a simple end, felt my feet move after him once more. I went back after some days because sleep would not take me. The service road looked smaller in daylight, the fence gap less like a door and more like a tear. I told myself I was only walking to clear my head, to prove the night had exaggerated everything. I thought I would find only trees and my own echo, and that would be the end of it. But the path remembered my steps. Pine needles held the shape of our crossing like a faded bruise. The place under the leaning trunk was empty now, only a shallow print where a head had rested, and a drag mark where the stretcher had taken weight. I stood a long time with my hands in my pockets and tried to make this whole thing simple. He lived, I helped. The forest moved on. That would have been a kind ending. The woods did not offer it. He came as quietly as shadow pulls across a floor when a cloud slides over the sun. Not a sound, only the feel of being seen before I lifted my head. He stood at the line where light breaks into green, alone, without stiffness, without fear, the gray of him washed clean by daylight. He did not bare his teeth. He did not lower his head. He only looked at me and did not look away. I did not move at first. My heart did, though. It lifted and held like a bird caught in a gentle hand. I took one step and then another. He matched me by not moving at all. The air between us felt like a thread again, pulled just enough to sing. I raised my hand, palm open, then let it fall. He was not mine to touch, not in the sun, not now. He breathed, slow and strong. I could hear it in the hush. He had carried the night and come out the other side. I did not know how to carry what he had given me. He looked at me the way someone looks when they have left a part of their secret inside you and want to be sure you still have it. I thought he would vanish as soon as I blinked, that he would prove to me what I had always believed. The wild does not return. But he stayed, patient as a question you have to answer out loud. I told him what I had learned about the man, about the ambulance, about the hours after. I do not know why I spoke. Maybe because some truths need a witness who will not repeat them. A wind shifted and brought with it a thin, familiar scent that cut the warmth like a knife drawn fast. Not blood, metal, faint, but there. The wolf's ears turned and then returned to me. Gratitude was in that look, and something else that cooled the back of my neck. Warning. He took a single deliberate step to my left and glanced, not a head jerk, not a point, just that slow, human look, to a thicket near the old service bridge, a place my eyes would have slid past. Then he looked back at me and waited. I followed his gaze. Between two roots, half hidden by leaves, the sun caught on a loop of wire like ice. My mouth went dry. It had not been there the night we came through. Someone had come back to the woods with hands that had not learned yet. "I'll tell them," I said, the promise standing up in my throat. "I'll come back. I'll make sure." He blinked once, slow as sleep, and the panic that had crawled up my spine settled. He did not come closer. He did not drive me away. He only stood where light met shade and held me in that steady, impossible regard. I had thought I was finished with the story, that I would never see him again. But the forest does not measure endings the way we do. He lifted his head slightly and breathed the air, tasting more of it than I ever will. Then he did a thing I still cannot explain without shaking. He turned his body sideways to me, making himself smaller, and held it that way as if to say, "Do not be afraid any longer. Be awake." It was gratitude, and it was a warning, and it was a trust I did not know I could carry. I took a step toward the thicket and saw how the wire bit the bark, how the anchor was tucked to look like nothing at all. I did not touch it, not then. I wanted to, and the nurse in me reached for tools, for action, for the clean line of doing. But the wild has rules, and one of them is this: do not rush what must be done right. I told him again I would return with the right hands. I told him I had heard. For a long moment we stood there, with the quiet between us like a shared breath. Then he turned. No drama, no sound. He walked back into the trees at a calm, even pace, not looking over his shoulder. He did not need to. Something in me was already moving with him, even as my feet stayed still. He left no message but the clean line of his prints and the memory of his eyes. I thought that was the last I would ever see of him, that the rest belonged to rangers and cutters and daylight. Maybe it does. Maybe not. On my way out, I marked the snare with a strip of cloth and a prayer and felt the thread between us loosen, not break. He had looked at me like he had left a part of his secret inside me, and he had. I walked back to the gate with my hands shaking and my steps sure, knowing I would return and that the forest was not done with me yet. I have told this story in pieces, and still I do not believe myself. I hear my own voice, and it sounds like a stranger's. I see the hallway lights, the wet asphalt, the thin thread of a service road, and then a wolf waiting at the edge of the world for a nurse to follow. I can name the steps, I can list the pulses and bandages and breath checks, but there is something I cannot measure. Mercy stepped out of the trees wearing a gray coat, and it asked me for help. He led me to a man I should have found too late. He lay broken and fading, caught by the same steel he had laid for wolves. I felt shock rise and fall in me like a wave, and in that rise and fall, the wolf made a sound so low I felt it more than heard it. There was no anger in that call, only despair and a plea. I had never seen a wild animal look with a request. I had never felt a request change my body the way that look did. I worked with what I had. I pressed and rapped and spoke. The wolf lay at the man's feet and breathed like he was counting with me. When my knuckles brushed his face, he pressed his temple into my hand and closed his eyes for one heartbeat. I have touched 1,000 human foreheads. I had never touched a wolf. That small trust broke something open in me that had been hard for years. The man came back and cried and told the truth he owed. He said the traps were his. He said he had wanted wolves dead. He said he deserved the bite of steel. He looked at the animal that could have left him there and could have finished what the trap began. He said, "I wanted you dead, and you stayed." The wolf's answer was a slow blink and a soft breath and a patience that felt like a judgment and a pardon at once. I called for help with a single bar that felt like a loan from the sky. I watched the wolf stay until hands came and straps crossed and doors shut. I watched him walk to the edge of hard light and refuse to cross it. I watched him face the deeper trees and call once more, not for pity, but for purpose. He had saved a man who had hunted him. He had more work to do. I returned in daylight because the night had taken hold of my sleep. He came again, quiet as a held breath, alone, unafraid, and he looked at me a long time. Gratitude was there, and warning. He turned his gaze to a thicket I would have missed. In the leaves, a loop of wire glinted like ice, new steel, fresh harm. He told me without a word that the story was not finished, that goodness is not a single act, but a road you keep walking. I cut a strip from my own sleeve and marked the place. I called the people who cut and carry and write reports. I walked rangers back along that narrow path and watched them find more metal sleeping in the dirt. I felt shame heat my face for a world that keeps doing the same hurt. I felt something else move through me, steady and hard as a promise. I would not look away again. I would not say later and mean never. When the work was done for that day, I stood at the gap in the fence and waited without any reason to expect him. He came to the line where shadow meets sun and watched me the way he had watched me the first night. He did not need thanks and did not seek it. He needed me to stay awake. He needed me to keep faith with what I had seen. I had thought I was the one who knew how to save. I had thought training and practice and a calm voice were the whole of it. The forest humbled me. The wolf showed me a mercy I have begged humans to find and watched them refuse. He showed me that survival can make room for grace, that strength can choose not to take, that a life can be spared even when a wound was meant. He showed me that forgiveness can be a first response, not a last resort. When I try to tell it plain, my throat tightens, my hands shake, tears come without warning. A part of me wants to be quiet forever because there is holiness in silence after a miracle. Another part of me wants to stand in the parking lot and stop every stranger and say, "Listen, you do not know the half of what lives beside us." I hold both parts at once and feel the weight of that holding. I keep thinking of the moment he pressed his head into my hand. It was the smallest touch, and it changed me. I keep thinking of the way he lay along the man's boots, as if keeping time with a fragile rhythm. I keep thinking of the look he gave me in daylight, the way it left something in me I cannot put down. He looked at me like he had left part of his secret inside me, and he had. There is a sentence I do not like saying because it sounds impossible even to me. A wolf saved a poacher's life and asked a nurse to help him do it. This cannot be real, and yet I saw it with my own eyes. Every time I reach for doubt, I catch the smell of wet pine, I hear the soft hum he made to steady me, I see the shine of wire in the leaves, and the doubt sits down and goes quiet. I do not know what that wolf believes about me. I know what I believe about him now. I believe he chose mercy over hate. I believe he warned me so others would not bleed. I believe the wild carries a wisdom that refuses our easy stories and still offers us a better one if we are brave enough to follow. If your heart is shaking now, you know what I knew in the trees. If your throat feels too tight for words, you know what the truth can do. If you believe animals remember kindness, right, nature is wiser than we are.